Welcome to Journeys. I'm Gleaves Whitney. Heaven knows why, but on Easter Sunday 2020, I thought back to a conversation I had with Christopher Hitchens. I invited Christopher to come to the Hauenstein Center to talk about Thomas Jefferson. It was October 3rd, 2006, and on the 2-hour drive from Detroit Metro Airport to Grand Rapids, he mentioned that his next book would be released in the spring. It was called God Is Not Great. Since Christopher knew I was a Catholic, he counted on the title being an irritant. It was, and to pass the time on the drive through corn country, he invited me to try and take him down as an atheist, defend why anyone should be a believer. He anticipated encountering fierce resistance on his upcoming book tour, so a little sparring with me would give him the chance to try out various rhetorical strategies out in flyover country. I happily accepted his challenge. All right, I said. There are a handful of arguments I've used over the years. First is the argument from desire, or more specifically, our frustrated desire for moral perfection. Why would people be made to feel strong natural desires if there were no corresponding objects to satisfy those desires? It makes no evolutionary sense. It would be like feeling the urge to play a computer game before the computer was even invented. Our natural desires would only have evolved in concert with the objects meant to fulfill those desires. So, I feel hunger only because food exists to satisfy my hunger. I feel thirst only because water exists to slake my thirst. The same for other desires like sex and beauty. If I have the desire for sex, there is my spouse. If I need beauty, there are sunsets and seashores, flowers, and rainbows. Why would nature implant a strong natural desire in me unless it could be satisfied? By extension, and here's the point, I feel the need to achieve moral excellence. I always want to make the perfect moral decision, then execute it flawlessly. That way, I'll always have a clear conscience, and then I have a shot at being happy. Alas, my conscience pricks me because of all the times I fall short. So does my wife. What am I to make of this frustrated desire? It's not unreasonable to infer that if I won't reach moral perfection in this life, then there must be an afterlife when I can. Otherwise, the desire makes no sense. Hindus call it reincarnation. Protestants call it heaven. Catholics call it purgatory on the way to heaven. By whatever name, I believe in the afterlife. This cannot be all there is. Well, after I'd said this, I looked over at Christopher, and his eyes were already at half-staff, and I didn't want to bore him with tiresome arguments since he needed to conserve his energy to perform that night. Yet, despite myself, I felt determined to drive that point home. Don't you think C.S. Lewis made a compelling point when he said, in Mere Christianity, quote, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." Close quote. Christopher grunted, unconvinced. Okay, I said, let's move from desire to Aristotle. How about Shakespeare's argument that nothing comes from nothing? And then Christopher interrupted me quite properly, nothing will come of nothing. That's King Lear, Act 1, Scene 1. Okay. Christopher, you know the line better than I. In its deepest sense, Lear's rejection of nihilism can be read as a bold-faced headline for Aquinas' 5 ways of inferring God's existence, as the unmoved mover, the first cause, the necessary being, absolute being, grand designer. Basically, it's an adaptation of Aristotle's metaphysics. The argument is that the material world could not have made itself come into existence. Before there were time and space and motion, there had to be some prior force greater than time, space, and motion. Spiritual is the overworked word we use for conveying something that's really special, really awe-inspiring and full of majesty. And it's that majestic force that brought time and space and things into existence and set everything in motion according to predictable laws. How else could the Big Bang have happened except at the instigation of some prior power that's greater than the chemical elements? No alternative makes sense. If we say that there was some prior material force that caused the Big Bang, and then some prior material force prior to the material force that caused the Big Bang, then we just get tangled in the knot of infinite regression. That doesn't work. Lear summarized it best. Kind of nothing will come from nothing. Christopher suddenly stirred. He said, "I've heard these arguments before. Maybe the failure to feel moral perfection or to understand the universe merely reflects our neuroses, our poor intellect and limited imagination. We're like blind men trying in our puny way to describe an elephant we've never before encountered." And then, changing the tempo, he said, "By the way, this good conversation is making me peckish. Is there an Irish pub nearby?" Well, at that point in the drive, we were going through mid-Michigan, so a short detour led us to Claddagh Irish Pub, near East Lansing. The pub is named for a fishing village south of Galway, known for its stony shore. We proceeded to eat a hearty lunch, during which Christopher enjoyed 2 Johnny Walker Blacks from the bar. Soon after, we were back in the highway, the warm autumn sunlight filling the car. The heat, combined with the fermented mash of grains he had just consumed, made Christopher drowsy. And then something happened I'd never witnessed before. About 15 minutes had passed when he suddenly roused from his nap. With eyes still closed, he flawlessly quoted Yeats's poem, The Second Coming, from memory. He reached the middle of the poem, the lines, "Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming." Hardly are those words out when Christopher says to me, "Now, Cleves, you should try giving me a different reason I should believe in God." I laughed. "That's one hell of a segue, Christopher, but I'm game. Let me try the argument from forgiveness. There are things I've done that I will never be able to forgive myself for. Not completely. I know it's unfashionable to admit in our therapeutic age, but I do have regrets about things I've said and done or not done, and no amount of self-talk takes the remorse away. I cannot breezily say of my life, no regrets. I mean, if Jesus had not died for us, we pitiable humans would have had to invent him to make our lives more bearable." Christopher was quick. He said, "Oh, I think we did invent him." He said that with satisfaction. And he added, "For the last 2,000 years, he's been the lamb who was slain, intellectually, over and over and over. Maybe Christians just feel more guilty than the rest of the population, like dogs. A dog feels bad when he steals your dinner. Does the dog need Jesus?" "Well," I said, "since the arguments from desire and Aristotelian metaphysics and forgiveness didn't move you, let me lob another one over the net. How about the argument from nostalgia, which in the original Greek refers to our yearning for home? I don't want to claim that the argument is original with me, but I've never encountered it. We all have that sweet but bitter yearning for something in our past. What is that? Well, we are born with our hearts entire. When we are young, our hearts are not yet broken. But every time we love, it's as though we give a puzzle piece to the person, place, or thing we love. We say, I gave my heart to my betrothed. I left my heart in San Francisco. A piece of it anyway. Through it all, we yearn to return to wholeness. We yearn to bring the pieces back together to make our heart complete again. But we cannot do that in this life. Only God can put our puzzle pieces back together in the afterlife. Fascinating, Christopher conceded politely, but I can tell he wasn't buying it. So I tacked in a different direction. What about the supernatural spiritual strength human beings possess to endure the unendurable? The human spirit is hard to crush. Can the source of such inner strength be reduced to chemistry or evolutionary psychology? Or might it come from a greater power? Call it the argument from the human spirit. We've all marveled at it. We saw it on 9/11, when people overcame fear and rescued others in the face of impossible odds. They were not acting naturally. Where did such outrageous courage come from? We saw it in Admiral James Bond Stockdale, who survived for years as a POW in an annex of the Hanoi Hilton in Vietnam. He was not acting naturally. Again, where did such outrageous resilience come from? We saw it in Pope John Paul II, who forgave the man who tried to assassinate him. He was not acting naturally. Where did his outrageous capacity to reconcile with an enemy come from? I believe these great displays of the human spirit transcend nature. They manifest the divine spark in us. Don't such moments give us a view through the keyhole that reveals our true identity as creatures made in the image and likeness of God? Well, Christopher said, "That's a question I will encounter on the book tour. You're a generous bloke to give me some practice with your 5 arguments. You have played a good Hamlet who would no doubt say to me what he said to Horatio. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." Just so, I thought, as Christopher glanced at me with an arch smile. Was that his way of conceding Hamlet's point? Thanks for watching.